the same time, before I hand over to the speakers, also introduce to you Monique Morrow, who will be facilitating then with Mehran. Monique, is there forward to this session?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. May. Wonderful. Thank you, and hello, everybody. Thank you, Christelle, for the introduction. We have the pleasure of speaking with you this morning about the latest evolution of blockchain 3.0, and I'll be touching on non-fungible tokens. It's obviously been a few years since I had the opportunity to speak with the USB with respect to cryptocurrency and blockchain. And at the time, we were kind of in the midst of a meteoric rise in the value of Bitcoin and alternative currencies. That soon came to an end, like with most things, and the advent of crypto winter started, which certainly lasted a few winters. And interest only really renewed when prices certainly started to appreciate. However, in the background, I think the evolution of blockchain and its applications have certainly continued. And there's been a real wider interest from different industries out there, from institutions, from governments, and those that were initially most fearful. The banks seem to have embraced the technology as it continues to evolve at a rapid pace. And while blockchain itself provides the technology constructs to facilitate exchange, ownership, and trust in the network, it's really the digitization of value elements where asset tokenization becomes interesting. And with digital assets and their fungibility in an ecosystem, there are various drivers of valuation, and these include tokens based on crypto economic models that are driven by supply and demand and the utility of the network. Non-fungible tokens, which I'm going to be touching on, which have an extrinsic value, but essentially things that are simple proof validations of existence and authenticity. And fungible tokens that are valued on various bases, such as a sum total of economic activity in the network, things like cryptocurrencies. And as Monique will no doubt explore, blockchain 3.0 envisions a connected, trustable, accountable network for efficiency delivering value, and hence crafting an infrastructure for things of worth. And NFTs represent both transferable entities and non-transferable tokens that we value, such as our own identification, healthcare records, and digital passports that really represent us and allow us to participate in the digital economy with our own unique digital identities. And it's with great pleasure today that we're joined by Monique in Switzerland. I've had the pleasure of knowing Monique for a number of years, both as a personal friend, but also as a colleague at the University of Nicosia. I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule, so we're honored that you can spend some of your precious time with us. So our discussion flow for this morning will be setting up the opportunities and trends in this space with specific reference to the telecommunications industry and architecture surrounding the implementation of blockchain. I'll then move on to discussing some of the latest developments with respect to non-fungible tokens and the rise in popularity of digital art, some of the opportunities that NFTs present alongside some of the concerns that have arisen as a result of the existing protocols that are employed. And then we'll conclude the presentation by looking at the future of blockchain and its impact on business and industry. So over to you, Monique.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you again, the University of Stellenbosch Business School for inviting me to actually participate in this webinar. I think, as Mehran stated, we both studied at the University of Nicosia. And one thing that I would like to say is that, we received our degrees. As you could imagine, you have a hard degree, a copy of your degree, or a degree that is paper, but we also have the degree referenceable on the blockchain. And I think that's important because in the event that you lose something, that's the purpose, that you're able to reference it with, a cryptographic key. It's been given to you by an organization the organization that's given you that degree. So that's just a level of the background. But I think it's important for us to level set, context here in terms of what are we talking about in terms of blockchain. What is it? Some people don't know what it is. They think it's sort of this very, technocratic technology, and in fact it has been. But when I sit and look at where we are as we evolve from blockchain 1.0, which was mainly Bitcoin, to 2.0, which is sort of the early adopters, starting in the industry, sort of the crossing the chasm to what I will talk about in 3.0. So essentially what blockchain is, it's a digital ledger. And if you think about ledger, you think about how you record something. And transactions can be, distributed, let's say, across a networking computing system. So there, you form a chain, and what you do, you actually have you solve a puzzle in the process. And the reason why you have blockchain is because you are dealing with sort of untrusted entities, could be untrusted entities, and that's important in this context. And why would you select blockchain over something else? Well, you don't have to have blockchain insofar as it is an alternative to dealing with an Excel sheet or an SQL database. It's basically kind of a decentralized database where multiple participants, and they may be known. That's the one thing I just said, they're not known, but they may be known if you have sort of a private permission context. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. And so the thing that I would like to say in terms of what blockchain is, it's a database, it's distributed. Why people use it, mainly for automation purposes, especially if you're looking at third-party providers and so on. So this is kind of an overview. Hopefully you understand that it's a distributed digital ledger. It's like replacing an Excel sheet or an SQL database. But here's the difference. It's forever, it's immutable, meaning to say that whatever you register on the chain, it's very difficult to unregister because it's forever there. And so here you have to be careful what goes on to the chain, garbage in, garbage out. So this is extremely important in terms of context itself and setting up the context. Next slide, please. So, and it's important to see where we are in this whole evolution. As I said before, 1.0, it was very much linked to Bitcoin. This has been a fintech-driven, economic push, if you will, to looking at how we create value, but how we create so sort of like the internet of value, or the internet sometimes referred to as the internet of money. And 2.0 moved from hype, as I stated before. Many studies have actually capitalized this or captured this from hype to early adoption by the industry, by large companies. And one use case that came to fore has been dealing with supply chain validation. Supply chain validation, you can imagine if you're a large multinational company, how do you deal with validating, for example, the supply itself? How do you deal with the looking at what is the provenance of what it is you're actually trading on, for example? Could be pharmaceuticals, it could be, how are they fake, and that type of thing. So it's actually an assertion and in terms of the supply itself. And then it got into as 2.0 started to mature. It got into looking at mercantile, looking at book of ladings type of thing in terms of contract. And contracts are very, very, very complex. How you actually again validate, verify signatures and notarization, digital notarization, such that they are true, rather than using email, Excel sheets, and so on and so forth. So automation starts to come in, validation of the source of what it is you're actually putting, asserting to on the chain, pharmaceuticals, whatever it is that you have, could be anything. And then, of course, making sure that you are participants in that chain itself. And it's also one of the things that we have to say from the beginning is, the double spend was an example of what we had to do, what the industry has had to deal with when we deal with blockchain. So to prevent sort of a double spend and to assert a level, this is the interesting thing, a level of transparency. And I'll put transparency in quotes because you don't want to put everything on the chain. You don't want to put your genomics, genome DNA on the chain, for example, because at best blockchain is, as we said before, it's immutable. It's, you want to make sure that what's there is sort of, again, validation of sources. When we look at 3.0 in terms of the evolution, and I like what we have here in terms of looking at predictive analytics here, but private, public, and what we call distributed ledger agnostic is really important here. Now that you have adoption that we've seen in mainstream industry, from hype to early adoption, and furthering it now we get into sort of capitalization using open source amongst the participants. And the example that I will be talking about is a specific example in the telecommunication space and what may be driving that, because as is what you will know is that I am a member of the, I am actually a chair of the GSMA Distributed Ledger Technology Group, where the participants are mobile carriers globally and solution providers, and some of the problems that they are looking to solve. And one thing that I want to say here is that you want to have a business problem, not a technology problem. Technology is an enabler. When we talk about blockchain, it's an enabler. But what we're seeing now, as Mehran alluded to in the beginning of the frame up of the discussion, is that we're also seeing now this emergence, if you will, of a crypto industry, of a crypto supply of money, of a crypto supply of let's say digital assets, right? Which he will talk about fungible versus non-fungible. But even more interesting, we're going to get into crypto as a whole, which now you're seeing banking institutions, remember it was fintech, to other institutions starting to adopt it. And so now you have to look at where is this all playing? And the thesis here is that we're at a tectonic shift. We're at a tectonic shift of our systems today as we know it. And so if you can go back and 2020 is, hindsight is always 2020, looking at evolution of not only technologies, but evolution of business and the evolution of how we deal with areas of economics. We're in a tectonic shift that is really forcing us now to think about how we do things in a different way. Next slide, please. So let's take a view from a blockchain 3.0 from a view of the carrier industry. Go to the next slide, please. I am actually as I said before, I'm a chair of the GSMA Distributed Ledger Technology Group. We have, these are global mobile carriers from all over the world. And so carriers are looking at, one of the things that we're seeing is the opportunity to look at how we see ledger technology as we see it here to unlock value. And so there's this whole assertion that there could be telcos could actually have there could be $1.8 billion US dollars of 19 point I guess it's $9 billion of value that could be unlocked by 2024, and so, which is soon upon us. And so the areas that start to develop these particular use cases are in the payments. Remember, we said blockchain started out from a fintech payment. How did you deal with payments to wholesale settlements? When you are roaming, or when you have a SIM card in your mobile, mobile phone, obviously the carriers care deeply about how they reap revenue from their roaming business, and usually you have to deal with sort of the problems that are there to be solved. Maybe it's automation. How do you deal with settlement? What does settlement look like, and what currency, and so on. Identity and access management is starting to sort of emerge here. Decentralized identity, we can imagine that blockchain and identity starts to get into an interesting space around self-sovereign identity. As stated before, the supply chain becomes a very, very important area. Supply chain, because carriers deal with a supply chain. It's a wide supply chain. And then, of course, you can imagine that could we be offering blockchain as a service? We're seeing companies already doing that. Large entities are doing it. If I say Microsoft, or if you look at Amazon, you look at these big companies, they have been on this route or trajectory, if you will, of offering some notion of blockchain as a service. And certainly fraud management. I mean, fraud is definitely a use case here for the carrier industry. So if we go to the next slide, please. Gartner, this is a Gartner study, but there is, one of the things is that we see carriers perhaps in different parts of the spectrum versus the focus that they're dealing with, particularly at the GSMA. Some have been early adopters, some have continuing on the trajectory, some are watching it to, again, it's about a business problem. And I will say that something that I will stress is 80% of the narrative here is about business. 20% is about how technologies like blockchain or artificial intelligence, machine learning, and if we look at security, add value to the business itself. So as we see, it's an enabling technology. There's this inspiration, kind of watching it, kind of being an early adopter, kind of experimenting with it, to actually embracing it for business. And so, when we talk about those four areas, particularly what we're seeing now is something of interest from an area that we're looking at as we correlate to the business. From a carrier perspective, is wholesale settlement is one that has been top of mind. So we have blockchain for wholesale roaming that is coming in per se. Then you've got fraud management and looking at how do you deal with gray routes and so on. How do you actually manage that? Payments are very much kind of emerging now. Think about as we kind of started out, looking at fintech. But could you imagine now could we imagine having a carrier or stable coin that is carrier inspired? And maybe you settle on a token that you've actually defined right in the industry. And of course, identity, as I've stated before. And what is important is we don't want to, as we speak in an industry, and particularly in this industry, refer to a particular technology in isolation. Technologies, actually, we have cross-domain integration of these technologies, as stated before. Some of them are architecturally inspired, like edge computing or machine learning and quantum computing, which is a space that we're now looking at in terms of looking at the security areas for blockchain itself, and looking at future networking. You can imagine future being 5G and so on. Next slide, please. So one of the areas is, to contextualize the use case opportunities, typically we have what is operator inspired, at the lower left. That's sort of where operators start from to where they go to the lower right, which is mainly collaborative, all of the kinds of examples that I've actually provided, to going into Greenfield, looking at some of the areas that could be of interest on the upper left quadrant, personal identity, device listing, to now what's becoming interesting in itself to the upper right quadrant is some big area problems, big area opportunities, whether they are bandwidth on demand, whether you have an establishment of a telco coin or a stable coin, what is global identity or blockchain with identity, digital identity look like. And quantum security is a big discussion, as I stated before, and the role there of DLT, particularly when we're looking at what are the areas that are challenging here from a security perspective, not only from what we deal with in cryptography, from technology, but also privacy. Because one thing I want to say here is that blockchain at best is pseudonymous, meaning that, it's not completely anonymous. I mean, what we're looking at is what does total anonymity mean? And I put that in quotes in terms of how you how you go and what does it mean to be on the chain itself? What do you put on the chain itself? So there's lots of discussions in this particular area. So we go to the next slide, please. I think that one of the key tenets that we always refer to in the blockchain space, and I stress this very much, is really a summary of the few slides, the previous slides, is you cannot take it in as a siloed business. It's got to be with other business technology enablers. It's got to be about a use case. It's got to be about a problem, a business problem. And it's got to bring, it takes time. It's got to, you have to have proof that the use of this particular technology as an enabler is creating more value in the business. And that's really very important in terms in that area. 80% of our narrative is around business value, and 20% has to be just the technology focus, as we said before, enabling. You go to a CEO or a CFO, depending on the company, they're not going to have a discussion on blockchain as technology. They want to discuss what is the value, what are you doing, what is the value, then you get into workforce, talent and so on. What is this pivot going to bring to me in business? What am I bringing on? Am I bringing on sort of a whole network, if you will, effect? Because the network effect is very important here. Otherwise, you're having engagements that are rather incubating, and you've got to be able to get into value fairly quickly. So the ecosystem it's a multi-stakeholders, whether they're operation companies or wholesale carriers, banks, mobile players, enterprise, because carriers have enterprises, customers, and policymakers. Policymakers are involved in the discussion. They have to be, because you're talking about a level of regulation, especially if we're looking at any trading on value, for example. If we're going to start dealing with crypto as an example, or what does governance mean overall? What does it mean to have a smart contract versus a Ricardian contract, and the latter being more very legal prose, but using the two. And so, these are the whole idea here in this particular group is to be able to demonstrate the proof points, because demonstrating proof points is very important for the participants, for example, in this particular group, the GSMA DLT, to look at how the opportunities can evolve, such that they can look at and say, look, this is a business that we can actually create, and use these particular technologies to do so. So I think this is important to note that. And these are the key tenets that we're always looking at. And the participants represent different groups. The technology group being very technical focused, the business group bringing value into the business cases, and the governance group being mainly regulators and the legal entities of these particular companies. Next slide. So I mean, you can see the step functions in terms of what the opportunities look like, what they can be. Where do you start out? This is from a low-hanging fruit is typically in the wholesale roaming place, in terms of looking at how you deal with smart contracts versus Excel sheets of Excel sheets of Excel sheets. And so settlement, you want to have a level of automation here. How do you deal with disputes, which becomes part of the smart contract nomenclature. Smart contract is really a set of rules. It's, if you are a programmer, you have a programming background, it's, you're setting rules and you're setting some trigger points here. And this is important. It's not smart per se, but you have events that trigger an action. That makes it a smart contract per se. I guess the simplistic view of a smart contract is if you go to a vending machine, you put money in and something comes out, you expect it to work. Well, that's a smart contract in its very simple terms. And then of course you get into contracts management. I think contracts management is very important here, especially as a case. Think about when you're doing a business with multiple entities, and you're dealing with contracts, and you're looking at mail exchanges. It's just very, very laborious, and we think that that is a very interesting use case, especially when you're dealing with service level agreements. Payments is coming up strongly now, and I think payments is coming up. I think it's more now. How do you deal with what do you settle in what wallets? Because wallets are going to be multiple wallets. You have multiple wallets, and especially, do you now start to define something like a token that you're going to, a carrier token that you could settle on? Do you look at this whole notion of a stable coin? By definition, a stable coin has an association, a digital association to something that is concrete, like a dollar or a rand in value. So you're starting to watch that development per se. And then of course into fraud, how do you get into sort of blockchain to look at how do you detect fraud and actually address it per se. This gets into decentralized identity, decentralized identity here, and you can think about lots of technologies that are used to enable that. And then of course, identity. I think identity is interesting because identity is multimodal. You have a cultural identity, you have your, but there is also sort of this identity itself. For example, low-hanging fruit could be, for example, a degree. That's kind of identity in the sense of a university has, a validating university has given me a degree, but also registered on the blockchain per se, in case that university goes out of business. I may have a work identity. I may have something that is used on to be able to ascertain my level of, let's say, experience. And this particularly is important if you're talking about people who have lost their degrees or who are refugees or migrant workers. And so that's an important area where you can use technologies like artificial intelligence to ascertain that, we think you have an experience in this area. And then you start actually building up, let's say, certifications such that they can be referenceable on the blockchain itself. And so that becomes very, very important. The point is that we have paper, but could we imagine replacing paper with something new? And that where we could actually reference it when we have to reference it. So what I do here, even though this is in the carrier space, but if I take a wider view, I always ask the question, if you had 3 minutes and what would you take with you to take something? I mean, we can see the tragedies that have occurred globally. This is kind of where that narrative goes. And so could we think about being very creative about looking at how we have digital certifications, if you will, whether it's in professionally or not, or, education and training and so on. But this is a space that's becoming quite interesting. It could be a space that we're seeing, and if you want to kind of look at research here in this area, or not research per se, but follow decentralized identity as an interest area. Next slide, please. So the reference architecture that we have adopted here is from the GSMA is modular. And so, here what you can see is that you've got certain functions that are occurring. This is from a technology perspective, also from how you would develop it up to a business area. Now, the assumption here is that, so you have multiple ledger technologies, whether they are Hyperledger Fabric at the bottom. Hyperledger is from the Linux Foundation. Most carriers use Hyperledger today. You've got other types. Ethereum is probably known to others. So the whole idea is to be the distributed ledger technology. That is what is inferred here. That is what is meant. And of course, everything is open sourced. That's really very, very key. And then you get into this notion of the next layer around smart contract enablement. Remember, smart contracts all about rules, so that you actually look at what you do off-chain and on-chain. Off-chain to mitigate any kind of let's say, heaviness on the chain itself, so that you are able to look at to be able to do things that are, less that requires less work functions, if you will, to become nimble. And then you get into how you deal with legacy services for the carriers. The whole rule here is that carriers have systems, whether BSS, they have operating systems, they have IT systems, they have legacy services, things that are used constantly to present services, if you will, or to present solutions. And by no means should they be forklifted or replaced. So there is a requirement to make sure that this is backwards, compatible. So we won't get to full ledger agnosticity, today, but this is about the route to get to it. And then, of course, you've got functions here that makes sense if you are have an IT background, or what you need to be dealing with. Again, in terms of user management, certificate of authority, to event distribution, as what we look at as development of the referenceable application or APIs, interfaces to business. And business at the top is really very key. So blockchain for wholesale roaming is first off, there have been MVPs, and now they're looking at developing it further. You can get into looking at decentralized identity. This, as I spoke about before, as a particular case, messaging as a case, and so on. So the whole idea of an architecture of this nature is also business architecture. It's not only from a technology, from an IT use per se, but it's also a business architecture. I don't like to use the term future proof, but it gets you into sort of the direction of how you actually can capitalize and actually use this architecture such that it, you can repeat it to create new business, to create new value, and so on. Next slide, please. So it's modular. Yeah, I mean, these are sort of the success factors, because nothing is defined unless you have success factors that are important. Interoperability as a goal. I mean, we have seen IBM's created a relay kind of protocol, which they published a couple of years ago, and they're looking at open sourcing it. Scaling properties are very important here, because we need to, the whole modus operandi is to be able to start small and prove the business value, prove the business hypothesis with this technology, and start small with a group of your peers in the industry, which is really important, around a problem area, around a business opportunity. And so, you want to have sustainable benefits in the long run. It's got to be, repeatable as a business. Security absolutely has to map security and privacy, as stated before. And it's not about looking at compliance per se when we're talking about privacy, especially in blockchain. If you're on the technical side, a hash function is considered hash. As a function is considered data in itself. So you have to look at how you deal with making sure that what you put on this chain is private, is not private, but it's not your. It cannot be associated to you, right? To you as an individual, and that's really very important. So privacy and the space is really key. The technology maturity. It's, as we said, if you think about that Gartner study, or it's companies and organizations have been crossing the chasm for some time now. There is this adoption, but it's the adoption that's going into really interesting problems to solve for, and with the intent of creating business at the end of the day. Regulations tend to lag, and I think this is really important. Why? In the ecosystem that we develop here, that we have regulators and policymakers as part of the journey. They have to be part of the journey. And so this is why we create a different group that is dedicated to governance, so that they can follow it and have a step function together with business, technology, as well as regulation, which is jurisdictional based, depending on your country and so on. Capacity building, people want to learn, they want to know what this is all about. How does it refer to me as a consumer, as an enterprise, somebody who may be leading an enterprise, and especially from the carrier perspective, how does that work for me? What does it mean? And then of course, looking at being able to transition to something that is useful from a distributed ledger technology perspective, or DLT. And so you can see that the models here are very, very important. So you have to be able to look at implementation to assure that all parties are involved here, that the commercial aspects are well understood. And well understood means at the CEO level, the CFO level, up and down the entire organization, that it doesn't appear to be a science project. And this is really important. You're a business school, and so it's looking at how do you use this technology to create business, especially if we're talking about the carrier telecommunication space. Okay, next slide. So, this is basically kinds of the examples that have what we're looking at in terms of an ecosystem of stakeholders. You've got consortia, you've got operators, 5G for those, looking at what's happening in the space of the carrier space, 5G and development, and how we sort of define them in terms of influencer versus, a player versus, an active player or central player. So clearly you can see that the operators and, the mobile virtual network operators are very key in this discussion, as well as we get into more of the, the expertise that is required. Typically what we do is we bring in, as you've been doing here, is external speakers to talk about a particular use case and how it can actually work in the business of a particular carrier and its company. Okay, next slide. And so before I transition, I think it's important to note that what's happening, and I really want to make sure that folks understand this is from the carrier space and what we see in as a chair in the GSMA representing my company. But I think what's really important now is there is a lot of work, a lot of hype, if you will, or is it hype, in terms of what is fungible tokens, what is value, what is non-fungible token, and you're hearing this and you're going, oh my God, what is it? And I would like to transition to my colleague Mehran to actually talk about what it is, to make it concrete for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So as we've mentioned before, the creation of Bitcoin kind of introduced this concept of trustless digital scarcity. And before it, really, the cost of digitally copying something was next to nothing. And, with the advent of blockchain technology, programmable digital scarcity has really become possible, letting us really map the digital world to the real world. And if we take a good example, fiat money such as the US dollar, that's really a good example of something fungible. If Alice has a $5 banknote, she can replace her banknote with Bob's $5 banknote without it affecting either party. But on the other hand, Alice's favorite limited edition basketball card is a good example of something non-fungible. So each card is really treated as a collectible and has individual properties. A card with one player doesn't usually have the same value as a card with another player. And on top of that, if you consider two have exactly the same cards, other factors such as the year of production or how the card is preserved can have a significant difference. An extreme example of something non-fungible is a piece of art, which I'm going to talk about today. A painting, as an example, is created as only one original copy. So now we know exactly what non-fungible means. What are the most common properties of NFTs? Well, the one that is most popular is that of being unique. Each NFT has different properties that are usually stored in the token's metadata, the data of all data. The second is that it's provably scarce. There's usually a limited number of NFTs, with an extreme example of being only one. The number of tokens can be verified on the blockchain, hence its provability. And the third is that they're indivisible. Most NFTs cannot be split into smaller denominations, so you can't really buy or transfer a fraction of your NFT, unlike cryptocurrency. And finally, similar to standard tokens, NFTs also guarantee the ownership of the asset. They're easily transferable and or fraud-proof. So although NFTs can be implemented on any blockchain that supports smart contract programming, the most noticeable examples are ERC-721 and 115 standards on Ethereum. But before we get into both of those, let's just quickly recap what ERC-20 is, if you've not heard of it, as it'd be useful for comparison. So it's a well-known standard for creating tokens on the Ethereum blockchain, and some of these examples can be stablecoins such as USDT or USDC, and DeFi tokens such as Lend and Uni. And really, the ERC-20 kind of standard allows for creating fungible tokens. So all of the tokens that were just mentioned are completely indistinguishable, and it doesn't matter if we receive USDT, for instance, from our friend or from one of the exchanges, the value of each token is still the same. And to simplify this explanation, we're skipping the possibility of receiving tainted tokens that would actually make a difference between tokens, making them less fungible. But if we look at ERC-721, it's a common standard for the creation of NFTs. It allows for creating contracts that can be used to create distinguishable tokens with different properties. A good example of this is the famous Crypto Kitties, a game that allows for collecting and breeding virtual kittens. 115, on the other hand, is the next kind of evolution in the creation of NFTs. This standard allows for creating contracts that support both fungible and non-fungible tokens. It was created by a blockchain-based gaming platform known as Engine. And in many games, such as World of Warcraft, as an example, a player can hold both non-fungible items, swords, shields, armors, and fungible items such as gold or arrows. So this standard really allows developers to define both fungible and non-fungible tokens and decide how many of these tokens should exist. Well, NFTs are often referred to as crypto collectibles. They expand this idea, and unlike cryptocurrencies, where each token, as I've mentioned before, is equal, NFTs are unique and limited in quantity. And they're really a unique building block in a new blockchain-powered digital economy. And many NFT projects have really experimented with this technology in a variety of use cases, including gaming, digital identity, licensing, certificates, and more recently, more popular, fine art. So what's more is that NFTs allow kind of for fractional ownership of very high value items. And one of the most popular NFT projects that kind of gained significant attraction was Crypto Kitties, like I mentioned before, which was based on Ethereum and allows players to collect and exchange virtual cats. CryptoPunks, as we can see down here in the bottom left-hand corner, are really collectible pieces of digital art. Each has a unique NFT character, and this project was really an inspiration for the 721 standard and was one of the first examples of the crypto art craze. And they have since sold for millions of dollars and inspired millions of projects around the world. And you can see some of the values of these this art to the tune of $7.57 million for number one there. More recently, a famous artist by the name of Damien Hirst is also jumping on the digital art bandwagon. He's making his own NFTs and cryptocurrency. And his collection really consists of 10,000 original works on paper, which were created 5 years ago, that are currently locked or housed in a vault, and they're about to come to life through their launch on the blockchain, at which time they'll exist as an NFT and also a related cryptocurrency. And he's largely testing the crypto waters for his own benefit by accepting cryptocurrency in either Ether or Bitcoin as payment for a new edition of laminated prints. And so far, he's racked up sales of about $22.4 million by selling 7,500 of those prints at approximately $3,000 each in 67 countries. And if we look at some of the top NFT sales a few weeks back, include the internet inventor Tim Berners-Lee NFT sale, which was sold, interestingly, through Sotheby's. It sold for $5.4 million, and a CryptoPunk sale for $1.06 million, while Reddit launched or auctioned its first NFT for about $250,000. We've also seen that more people are jumping on the bandwagon. Binance, for instance, and Tezos are making inroads into the NFT space. Tezos has recently launched its own marketplace in March, while Binance Marketplace is something definitely to watch in the upcoming months. But it hasn't really been plain sailing. You know, the non-fungible market has experienced kind of a roller coaster ride over the past year, and some of the latest major deals show how buyers strive to put a value on different types of digital art. And an artwork by a budding artist can fetch $2 million, while source code by the acclaimed inventor can reach about $5.4 million, as demonstrated by the latest auctions. A more recent NFT auction to attract major spenders was hosted by Christie's, featuring artwork by an artist called Ferocious, an 18-year-old crypto art surrealist whose 5 art pieces were sold for approximately $2 million. And there's some more stranger things, as shown here on the right, that are actually being sold as NFTs. But NFTs and the development of them have really brought us crypto art and digital collectibles, but it doesn't stop in those particular use cases. So from real estate to logistics, you can use NFTs to prove the authenticity of many unique and collectible goods. And, you know, linking real world assets with NFTs can digitize the way we prove ownership. For example, real estate, we typically deal with physical property deeds. Creating tokenized digital assets of these deeds can move highly liquid items like a house or land onto the blockchain. And if we go back to April of this year, a gentleman by the name of Shane Dulgaroff created an NFT representing a property sale in California. It also has a piece of crypto art attached to the token. So anyone who wins the auction will receive the NFT and ownership of the house. The exact legal situation of the sale and the rights of the buyer or seller are kind of still uncertain, as like Monique has mentioned, the regulation tends to lag behind the innovation. But when it comes to smaller items like jewelry, for instance, an NFT can prove legitimate ownership when reselling. A genuine ethical diamond usually comes with a certificate of authenticity. And then this certificate is also a way of proving you have ownership rights. So anyone trying to resell that item without the certificate cannot confirm its authenticity and may have problems convincing buyers they are the rightful owner. But by having an NFT associated with an item, owning the NFT can also become just as important as owning the asset. You can even embed the NFT into an item with a physical cold storage wallet. And as we see the Internet of Things develop, we'll likely see more NFTs being used to represent real-world assets. So blockchain technology is also very useful in the logistics industry, particularly because of its immutability and its transparency. These aspects ensure that supply chain data remains authentic and reliable. And, you know, with food, commodities, and other perishable goods, it's important to know where they've been and for how long. But an NFT has the added benefit of representing unique items. We can use that NFT really to track a product that contains metadata on its origins, its journey, and warehouse location. good example of this is a high-end pair of luxury shoes that are created at a factory, for instance, in Italy. It's assigned an NFT that you can quickly scan onto the packaging, and the time-stamped metadata is included of when and where the shoes were created. And as the product goes through the supply chain, the NFT can be scanned, a new time-stamped metadata is added, and the data could include its warehouse location and time of arrival or departure. So once the shoes arrive at their final destination, a store can scan them and mark them as received. An exact detailed history is available to view and confirm the shoe's authenticity and its logistical journey. And like an image, file, or a video, you can also attach audio to an NFT to create a collectible piece of music. Think of it as a digital first edition of a record, and attaching a song to an NFT is similar to our art example, but there are other use cases. Big issue for musicians for many, many years is getting a fair share of royalties. But there are at least two possible ways to achieve a balanced outcome: blockchain-based streaming platforms and a blockchain royalty tracking. It's easy to forget that NFTs don't often derive value from a song or even a picture. In decentralized finance, which is becoming extremely popular over the past year or so, NFTs can provide unique financial benefits. Most will also have artwork too, but their value really derives from their utility. Gaming also has a huge demand for unique items that are tradable and purchasable. Their rarity directly affects their price, and gamers are already familiar with the idea of valuable digital items. Microtransactions and in-game purchases have created a multi-billion-dollar gaming industry that could tap into NFTs and blockchain technology. So it's also an exciting area in terms of what an NFT represents. Token for video games can combine aspects of art, collectability, and utility for players. But the market for NFTs is really quite small when we compare it to other markets, and somewhat kind of harder to measure than the cryptocurrency market, given the lack of spot prices for various assets. And for this purpose of analysis, we focus on the secondary trading volume, which is really the peer-to-peer sales of non-fungible tokens. And as an indicator of market size, we estimate the current secondary market to be roughly in the few $1 million in volume per month. But given its earliness, probably the best way to measure the growth of the market is to look at a leading indicator, which is developer interest in this space. And over the past year, the number of mainnet 721 contracts has grown exponentially as new developers enter into this space, hitting the thousands in the most recent months of this year. But some describe NFT as DeFi's kind of second act. And just as what we've seen with cryptocurrencies has helped really establish a decentralized financial system, NFTs have kind of helped artists bypass the middlemen and the gatekeepers of the traditional art scene. Which was centered on galleries to verify, authenticate price, and even select and showcase art. And if we go back to the 1970s, many artists bypassed the galleries by turning it into street art and graffiti, often at a considerable risk and without the ability to monetize or possibly receive authorship credit for their work. By decentralizing and democratizing this kind of art market, more individuals are able to control what they want to display, sell, and easily transfer their works without the need for the traditional or conventional type of infrastructure. And probably in the beginning, what we see is that the traditional art world will be on the defensive, like financial institutions were to cryptocurrency. But as we see from the creation of many new technologies and applications, the bridge between the two starts to converge over a period of time. And we've seen that with the likes of Sotheby's and Christie's becoming involved in the NFT space. But you're probably wondering, well, how do you actually create and sell an NFT? Well, first up, you need a wallet to store your crypto and your NFTs. And obviously, I would recommend using something like Google Chrome and installing what they call the MetaMask wallet extension. Once installed, you can actually head over to a marketplace, such as one of the more popular ones, which is OpenSea, sign in, and all you have to do is follow the instructions in your wallet. You can then create your own collection, enter your description and collection's name, upload an image, bearing in mind that you're not actually creating NFTs at this point. You're just setting up your collection for you to display the kind of work that you want to showcase for people interested in buying. So for now, you can really only create one NFT at a time. So if you plan to create 5 versions of the same piece of work and want potential buyers to know the supply, you need to add kind of an edition number in the statistics section. And if you're keen to make more than one copy of the same item, instead of creating more individual tokens and noting the edition number in the stats, you can actually embed some code into it to ensure that that can be done. So the creation of the NFTs is not too difficult, and if you follow the instructions, this can easily be done, and you can showcase your digital art or collectibles on a marketplace platform. It's also very interesting that you can actually add unlockable content that only the item owner can view. So examples of unlockable content include high-res imagery files, contact info for redeeming physical items, access keys, and more. Recently at Catena Consultancy, we've commenced some work on a digital art NFT for a very unique supercar, that if you purchase that particular digital art as an NFT, you'd also have access to a private villa on an island as part of its unique context. So there's really a lot that can be done here, and it's quite fascinating. And obviously, if you like to edit an item, you can only adjust your tokens when you still own them. So make sure that they're right before listing them for sale. And the editing function also allows you to freeze your metadata onto a decentralized storage device. So then you can list your items for sale, and this is simply done by heading to the asset page on the public facing page, and you can just press sell, and then you've got the option to have a fixed price listing or auction them off, and then when you're happy, all you have to do is post your listing and follow the instructions in your wallet. But if you've never actually sold an item before, then what you'll have to do is pay a gas fee, because it's on the Ethereum blockchain, in order for you to be able to list. But it's a once-off fee, so that when you come to list new items thereafter, that's no longer required. But art isn't just about leaderboards, but collectors often use the rankings page or elements of gamification to discover new and exciting creators. And obviously, there's no doubt it's a very steep ascent to get to the top, but many traders actually filter the 7-day change. So there's ample opportunity, if you're interested in getting in this space, to get yourself in front of buyers. If you can generate a few early sales, you'll see that you climb up the rankings very, very quickly. But what about the carbon footprint? And really, is this a concern? Because basic statistics seem to bear this story out. Even aside from these headline kind of garnering sales figures that we're seeing, you know, the average NFT really only sells for about $1,000. But behind some of this excitement lies another quieter story. NFTs have, or potentially have, a large environmental impact, one that should give artists and customers pause for concern before jumping in on the trend. And to understand this environmental impact, it's necessary to understand exactly how crypto art is created and sold. And imagine that an artist kind of digitally creates and sells a piece of art. In scenario one, she prints out that art, packages it up, ships it to a customer. But in scenario two, she sells it as an NFT using an Ethereum-based service. And if we can walk through the carbon cost of each scenario step by step, it can become quite interesting. So in scenario 1, the artist lists their artwork online, and the customer will obviously purchase it. The artist prints the work and packages it up. It's then driven to their closest shipping store a few miles away. The store sends the package to its hub, where it's then sorted, and then from the hub it's then packaged off to the airport and flown along with many other packages to a main sorting facility. The package is then sorted and loaded onto another plane. That plane flies to the closest sorting facility to the customer, which can be many miles away. And then from that facility, that package is sent to a local hub where it's then sorted again and then put onto a delivery truck. So altogether, shipping a digital print to an online customer is approximately around about 2.3 kilos of carbon dioxide emissions at the various steps which we've just outlined before. And then typically driving a gasoline powered car in the US 100 miles causes 41 kilos of CO2 emissions. And obviously this calculation is based on some very crude assumptions, but it's just purely acceptable for illustrative purposes, just to highlight a potential problem. But now let's look at the NFT. Well, the artist finds a website that will facilitate her creating the NFT, one that we've just shown before. She simply uploads her artwork, titles it, clicks on a button to create, or what they call mint it. This minting transaction is then added to a list of unconfirmed crypto transactions. This list contains all the incoming activity, from simply buying and selling to more complex actions like embedding the record of digital artwork. A miner selects a subset of transactions to block together. The transactions are then entered into or added to the master ledger one by one, and they're bundled together in groups known as blocks. And then the master ledger is known as a blockchain because it's obviously made up of these blocks. And in order to add this block to the chain, the miner must race against time and other miners who are participating to solve this cryptographic puzzle. And they use trial and error to rapidly generate random numbers, checking each one to test if it's a solution. And obviously they use top of the line hardware that can make hundreds of millions of guesses per second. And this is what kind of potentially makes crypto art environmentally unfriendly. And it's not just one miner trying to add this block to the blockchain. There are thousands of them, and many are huge operations running massive networks of computers in China or Kazakhstan or in the Arctic or elsewhere, churning away trying to find a solution to each puzzle. And obviously the miner who first produces a correct solution is the winner. Miners check if the solution is correct. The process of confirming a solution obviously is much less energy intensive than finding it in the first place. And if it's confirmed, then the miner's block of transactions is added to the blockchain. And obviously the winning miner is then paid out in cryptocurrency for their services. The artwork now exists as an NFT ready to be sold to a customer. But where it's interesting is that each subsequent transaction for this NFT can potentially follow the exact same series of events, and on average generates a huge carbon footprint. And if each must be added to the block, the puzzle must be solved and verified, and over its life cycle, the average NFT can accrue a stunning footprint of around about 211 kilos of carbon dioxide. And that's really equivalent to driving 500 miles in a typical US petrol-powered vehicle. So that's some of the areas of concern. And to summarize, I think, for both scenarios, the carbon emitting life cycle can never end. This NFT can go on being bought and sold via blockchain transactions forever. But similarly, the print can also go on and be sold as it's shipped and sold to new buyers. But both could expand their carbon footprints indefinitely. And although we can't estimate, the carbon footprint accurately for each step of NFT minting process, we know that, the print would have to be bought and sold a large number of times to be carbon emitting as one average sale of an NFT. But for me, the core NFT developments are happening at a much deeper level, not unlike altcoins that were launched around about 2014 on the back of the Ethereum launch. An NFT, unlike a piece of art that hangs on my wall, can be so many different things. For example, it can be a financial instrument that pays out like an annuity. It can be something I borrow and lend money on instantly. It can be used for yield farming based on rarity, and it can be an artifact in augmented reality or an avatar in virtual reality. It can represent my own identity the way that a CryptoPunk can be a profile pic. So for me, the hype is far from done. Bringing together really the implicit value from the financial aspect of crypto and the speculative value from the art side is where we're going to start to see some fascinating new doors open in the future of the NFT space. And I think, you know, the pandemic really magnified some of the value propositions of crypto and decentralized finance. We kind of learned that our legacy financial system could have done a lot better in terms of sending stimulus funds to businesses and individuals. With decentralized finance, we remove and reduce the dependency on centralized and legacy financial systems, modernizing ourselves to continue economic leadership. And, you know, discussions around money supply, inflation, digital rights, proof of ownership, and smart contracts are certainly now part of the financial world and likely to grow over the coming years. Bitcoin has gone from a white paper concept to an official reserve currency in just 12 years in many parts of the world. And these feel like once in a lifetime changes that are happening in front of us today. And I hope you also look forward to seeing what kind of innovations and growth the next few years brings to the digital world. Monique, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, fantastic overview on non-fungible tokens and really, couching the opportunities here, and certainly with regard to carbon footprint, there's a lot more work to be done here. I fully agree. But here's the bigger thesis. Here's the bigger opportunity and call to action. One is to understand what it is, what we are talking about. This is the first step to doing that. The other is is to be able to look at where is the disintermediation opportunities in terms of blockchain for fintech. Recall that I talked about the mobile industry. I mean, your phone number is your bank, for example. Banks, as we know them in some parts of the world, we're dealing with negative interest, and so where do you store value these days? What does the store of value look like? There's this emergence of neobanks that are coming up in the world, and so this is also an area that we think that disintermediation is very, very ripe for. So this whole internet of value, internet of money, what's happening in our areas of financial institutions as we know them today, there is a tectonic shift, and that's very important to note. What is a correlation? If you think about it, the correlation is also to your mobile phone. Your mobile phone is your wallet. It's everything. And it is an extension, if you think about it, of your identity. So if we're looking at institutionalized finance, if we're looking at thinking about what is creating stablecoin as a service and so on, you may want to look at, what is this company called Paxos. It's been in existence since about 2012. Looking at, I think they have now PayPal as a partner here. Venmo, PayPal. So you can see what they're doing in terms of being the first regulated blockchain company, if you will, organization in the world, fully regulated. So it's in an interesting space to think about what they're doing and where they're going in terms of institutionalized finance, instruments, if you will, being able to trade real time amongst banking partners. Or you can look at Celo.org, and Celo.org is a kind of, they're complementary, and here with Deutsche Telekom announcing its investment into, and with Andreessen, investment partner in Cello.org, and Pax as a complementary. So there, actually, if we think about what's happening in these financial instruments, are very quite interesting in itself. And so where do you play? Where can you play? And what is it? Where does it make sense? But I will say that the thesis here, complementary to non-fungible tokens, is around stablecoin and its value, what's happening with stablecoin overall. And I think last but not least is, what does regulation look like? And this gets into types of studies that, we're seeing now an intersectionality between a computer science and a lawyer. So it's this intersectionality of what you study and what you come out with in terms of disciplines. It's not just a lawyer, it's not just a computer sciences, but you're looking at now this blending, if you will, of disciplines, and understanding how what does the technology enablement mean to citizens as a whole, in countries and so on. And I think that's important, because you have to have now sort of this smart, what we'll call smart regulation, and not just lagging, but being much more ahead of the curve, or at least in parity with this exponential, and it's probably always been exponential, if you will, a rise of new instruments. New value that has taken this journey. And if you think about the rise of the internet and looking where the internet, how it was developed to where it is now, to this whole notion of the internet of value, internet of money, and where you have now these technologies that are just coming into play and to be, looking at this potential, if you will, of disintermediation overall of systems as we know them, and systems as we know them today. So it's exciting times. I will say this is very exciting times to be here and to look at, where we are going to play in this, but not only sit on the sidelines, but participate actively. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique.
Thank you so much, Monique and Mehran. This is absolutely a fascinating view into an unknown world for me, and maybe some others. If I may ask, we have about 10 minutes or so. If there are anybody that would like to raise a question, you may put on your video screens. There's one from David coming up. David, you may raise your question.
Thank you so much, good presenters, and I would want to appreciate also the USB community in arranging this exciting kind of a contemporary issue. And as I understand it, surely blockchain as a data structure that holds transactional records, and while ensuring security, transparency, and decentralization, etc. and so forth. I would want to raise a question that already we might have some data structure information within our companies or organizations. So I just would want to say, one, is it sustainable? Two, can it be integrated to these softwares, so that at the end of the day, we don't have so many data transfer issues. So that's where I'm very much concerned about the integration of these systems. But otherwise, I would want to thank you so much, and I will try and make sure that I use the information even to purchase one if possible. Thank you.
So I'll take that. Thank you, David, for the wonderful question. If you looked at the example that I posed, for example, in the carrier space, integration is extremely important. So you just don't, the whole idea is to make sure that the systems, like the IT systems, are not disintermediated, especially if you are operating support, operating from a business perspective, and so on. So that is extremely important in terms of integration itself. When we look at data structures, if you data in the form of commonality here, like JSON. I mean, the structures are very common in that space. If you know how you deal with JavaScript and so on, those structures remain common in terms of a programming language. And the other component that I want to state here is that I'm giving it to you from a carrier perspective as an example, but open source is really important here, you know, in terms of which kind of blockchain version are you going to adopt? What's been most common out there, early adopted, has been Linux Foundation, Hyperledger Fabric. And so that's kind of matured in the sense of quite a bit of carriers have adopted it. For business, it's enterprise centric, and that's, I think, really important to call out. And now what we're seeing is other organizations adopting Ethereum. Ernst & Young has adopted Ethereum, just as an FYI. They are actually doing, you know, if you're thinking about auditing and what they're doing, certainly that's quite an example that I see. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Monique.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right. There is a comment from Sean in the comment box, and maybe Mehran, I think this might be a comment for you. It's a long comment. Sean says, fantastic, fascinating session. Thank you. Still trying to get his head around all of this. And he makes some comments. Perhaps you can later just maybe respond to that. Okay. In the meantime, I also would like to raise Lebohang. Yeah. She asked a question. Could your esteemed panelists expand more on how they see the regulation evolve in the SADC region?
Yeah, let me take that. So one of the areas representing my company that I've been involved in is Smart Africa. And so in Smart Africa, the whole idea of what's happening with blockchain, first of all, Africa's 54 countries, so about 40 plus countries are involved in Smart Africa. And I should say South Africa is leading in artificial intelligence. So let me put that as a step back. So Smart Africa in this blockchain is definitely an area of interest as in the emerging technology category. And regulators are quite involved in this discussion through the region. So this is important to note. Ghana is leading, for example, in terms of Ghana. So each country has a responsibility. As I said, South Africa is for artificial intelligence. Ghana is leading, for example, in the area of payment structures and wallets. And so that means that they have to work across the region and the other member countries to look to make sure that there is looking at how do you deal with taxation, how to deal with economic exchanges and that of the sort. So certainly there's quite a interest and the regulators are quite involved. And so in the discussion, part though, I must say, is that it's also educating. Right. So it's understanding what this technology means to citizens, understanding what it means from regulators are very concerned about outflow of value out of the country. So they want to make sure that they can correlate what's coming in from inflow of value to an outflow, because there is an association with taxation. So this is part of the discussions that we've been involved in, but to say that that's an area of concern. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Monique. Mehran, I'm not sure if you want to respond to Sean's input now.
Yes.
Just giving you time to read through.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading through it. Yeah, certainly at the bottom, adoption of blockchain and NFTs will significantly increase going forward. Absolutely agree. And obviously, when speaking to younger generations, they understand these concepts. Absolutely, I think they're the first and foremost to grasp these ideas, especially when it comes to new technology and the implementation of new technology. I mean, I only have to look at my own children, 16-year-olds, who are already delving into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and neither of them want to have a traditional bank account. They both have their own bank accounts, which they run off their mobile phones, their wallets embedded into their mobile phones, so they don't need to engage with anybody from a traditional financial institution. They actually don't want anything to do with it. So I believe, the adoption rates will certainly increase quite dramatically with younger generations going forward. Absolutely.
Absolutely fascinating. That's what you're saying now about youngsters just doing it from their phone and not engaging with traditional banks. Amazing. Yes. I wonder if Armin Wieland, would you like to make a comment? Is Armin still here? I think so.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, Armin.
Good. Well, depending on where you are, good afternoon. It's Armin here from V5 Digital, based in Windhoek, Namibia. Again, I think the other people were saying that as well. So thank you so much to the USB and also to the two panelists and guest speakers. That was really amazing and an eye-opener. I think my question is similar to the previous gentleman, whereas we are sitting here in the southern tip of Africa, not as advanced as South Africa, here in Namibia, just an average person running a digital marketing agency. And I kind of see the benefit, but I also don't see it. So I think that there was a lot of interesting facts presented, and also kind of telling us, well, where the world is moving towards, and kind of opening our eyes in terms of the potential. But again, I'm still stuck where I'm not, okay, what must I do next? Must I, watch the replay of the webinar and then do that? Or must I subscribe to something to learn more? Because I think I'm still in that world where I'm kind of gaining the knowledge or getting more exposed to that, but I'm still, I still feel very stupid about it. So it's like, what should I do next? Well, what can I do for my company or for my country just to move it forward one step? Because I still feel that it's a little bit overwhelming. So,
well, Armin, I always believe on understanding what I don't know. That's why I would often go. Listen, it's not feeling stupid about it. I think it more important is to learn. And so first, it's the fundamental, it's the basics. And so the webinar is the first step, but it's also the basics. And I think that's really, really important here is to understand that. I mean, let alone what we're doing with where NFTs are going. And the second step is then to see, well, how do you operate your business, and who are your partners in your business, and how do you actually exchange contracts and so on and so forth? And is there a better way to, I'll say, automate? So automation usually is a reason to do something in this particular space. So I think it's just mainly to learn what are what is the technology, what is blockchain, that's the basic stuff. How do you do business today, and whether or not there could possibly be an applicability. And so these are baby steps. You have to do the baby steps. It's not about a leapfrog. Now, in some cases, we've seen the region leapfrog in terms of how we deal with mobile phones and how it's a bank and an extension. We've seen that, particularly if I say M-Pesa and what's been happening. But I think it's more or less that as a step. And that's what I would advise personally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for that, Armin. Also, Mehran, Monique, just a huge, I think we're close to our time. I know Monique also has another commitment now. Just a warm thank you from us. Your time is, as Mehran has put it, it's precious. It's really, really precious. We know you are